Hey everybody, in today's video I want to provide you with a ton of value, and I really want to make the process of getting an E2 visa very clear. So in today's video I'm going to go over two examples of the step-by-step of what goes into getting an E2 visa from the very beginning to the end. And I'm going to go over two examples. The first example is going to be for a brand new startup company. If you plan to pursue an E2 visa as a startup company, you're starting a new business. And the second example, I'm going to use an example of one where you're purchasing an existing business. Again, I think you're going to find some great value in this video, so be sure to stick around till the end. So let's get started. As a quick overview, I'm sure you've heard me say this many times, the E2 visa is a great option for people that are looking to direct and develop their own business in the United States. There's so many benefits with the E2 visa in terms of its flexibility to allow you to grow and operate your own business in the US. There's no limit to the number of times that you can renew the E2 visa, and the benefits are so numerous. You can get an E2 visa for your spouse, and your spouse can work for any company in the United States. They basically get an open work permit, and your children under 21 years old can also qualify for their own E2 visa and can go to school in the United States. That's just to name a few of the many benefits of an E2 visa. As a quick overview, the E2 visa is a non-immigrant investor visa. It's available for citizens of certain countries that have a treaty with the United States. Many countries qualify, like Canada, France, Germany, and the list goes on, but there are certain major countries that do not qualify, like China, Brazil, and Russia. So the first thing is you need to make sure that you're a citizen of a country that has an E2 treaty with the US. The next most important thing about the E2 visa is that it's an investor visa. To qualify, you have to make a substantial investment in a US business. Now, the technical details of what constitutes a substantial investment is very detailed, and it's a legal assessment that for purposes of this video, we won't go into it. I have other videos where I explain it, but at our firm, we recommend investments of at least $100,000 or more. In our experience, investments of at least $100,000 have had a viable chance of success. Again, making sure that you're investing a substantial amount in the business. Additional requirements, you have to be coming to the United States as the E2 investor to direct and develop the business. Your investment funds must come from a lawful source, and the investment funds must be put at risk. You can't just simply deposit the money in your business's operating account and then apply. And we'll get into that as we go through the steps of the E2 visa, but I just wanted to highlight some of the general requirements. Additionally, your business can't be marginal. You can't just be operating your local corner lemonade stand. And also, you must have the intent to depart the United States once your E2 status ends. So now that we have a general understanding of the requirements of an E2 visa, let's go right into the nitty-gritty of the step-by-step process of going about getting your E2 visa. So again, example number one, we're going to be talking about a brand new startup business. And for purposes of this example, we will use the business idea of a restaurant. It's very easy to understand a restaurant business and to talk it through. And you can apply these steps generally to all kinds of businesses, whether it's a business that involves inventory, whether it's a liquor store, and whatever it may be. So what goes into it? First and foremost, the very first step you should take is to speak with an immigration lawyer. An immigration lawyer will be happy to hear you out and see if the E2 visa is the appropriate option for you. If it is, then that's wonderful. But by consulting with an immigration lawyer, you might discover that there's another avenue that might be much more well suited for you based on your unique goals and aspirations and circumstances. So it's always good to consult with an immigration lawyer first before taking any of these meaningful steps towards actually starting the business. Now, again, let's assume you've discussed with the immigration lawyer and it appears that the E2 visa is the appropriate vehicle for you to do what it is that you plan to do in the United States, which is to direct and develop your business. So the next step is likely going to be to set up your company. You're going to set up a corporation or an LLC. Likely, those are two of the most common business entity types that we've seen people utilize. Start an LLC or a corporation, or there's other business entity types that can qualify as well. But again, those are the most common ones that we've seen. After you register your business entity, you're likely going to need to get an EIN number from the IRS. An EIN number is specific to your business. Think of it almost like a social security number for your business. And you're going to need to get the EIN number assigned by the IRS so that you can open a bank account for your business. Now that you have registered your business entity and you've you've gotten an EIN number from the IRS, the next step is to open a bank account specific for your business. So it's different from your personal bank account. Assuming that you have your business bank account open, you're going to transfer your investment funds from your personal account to the business's operating account. And then that point, once the funds are successfully transferred to the E2 business bank account, you're now going to spend those funds on anything that your business needs. For a business that is a restaurant, you're likely going to need to lease a premises for the restaurant. You're going to find a location that you think is going to be suitable for your business, and you're going to go ahead and lease that location. You're going to build out the fixtures of the restaurant. You might need to get booths, chairs, tables. You might need certain equipment installed for the kitchen. You might need to get a hood to suck out all the smoke. All the things that go into a business for a restaurant. You're going to need to get menus. You're likely going to need to hire a chef. You're going to need to post your business on websites like Yelp and Google. And you're going to do all the things that go into setting up a restaurant business. So you're basically doing every single thing that you need to do to get your business either operational to the point where it's actually already operating, or to the point where it's just on the brink of where it's able to operate. What you don't want is a situation where many of these necessary steps to operate your business are not at all fulfilled. And I'll get into that in just a moment. But at this point, what we've discussed is that you've transferred the investment funds into the business bank account, and then you've begun to spend these funds on all the things that your business needs. While this is ongoing, you're likely going to be working hand in hand with your immigration lawyer to provide your immigration lawyer with documentation of all these things that you've been doing. You're going to provide your immigration lawyer with the newly formed company that you've established, the corporation or the LLC. You're going to be providing them with evidence of your transfer of the investment funds into the business's operating account. You're going to be providing receipts of all the expenditures that you've made for your business. You're going to be providing them with the proof of the source of your investment funds. Maybe you got the investment funds as a gift from your parents. Maybe you got the investment through the sale of one of your properties, whatever the case may be. Maybe you got the investment funds through saving money over time from your employment earnings. So however you obtained those funds, you're going to document the proof of how you obtained those funds, and you're going to provide that information to your immigration attorney. Now, as this process is ongoing, you're likely going to be working with a business plan writer who is going to be preparing a business plan for you to provide in your E2 application that's going to evidence what your business is all about, what your marketing plan is, how you're spending the investment funds for your business, what your projections are for year one in terms of your staffing and your revenue, what your projections are for years 2, 3, 4, and 5. There's going to be a lot of very important information that's going to be contained in your business plan. As you're doing all these things, as you're taking these actions to spend the funds towards your business, you're likely working hand in hand with your business plan writer as well to put together the plan of what your business is all about. Now, what's been done thus far? You've spent the money and your business is now at a point where it's either already operating or it's on the brink of operating. And at this point also, you've provided immense amounts of documentation to your attorney. It's at this point that your attorney is going to take all that information, and they've likely been doing this in the background anyways, where they've been essentially assembling your case. But it's at this point where the attorney is going to basically finalize the production of your case, file the case with the appropriate immigration agency. If you are lawfully present in the United States in some sort of a valid non-immigrant status, there is a chance that you're going to be doing a change of status. A change of status is where you change from whatever non-immigrant status that you're in. Let's say you're on a visitor visa, let's say you're on a student visa, or maybe you're on an H-1B visa or some sort of a non-immigrant visa. A change of status is when you change that status while you're in the United States to another non-immigrant status. In this case, it would be E2 status. So that's one option for those that are lawfully present in the United States in a valid non-immigrant status. Now, alternatively, if you're outside of the United States or you're in the United States but you want to obtain a visa, then the process is a little bit different. Your immigration lawyer is going to take all the documentation for your case and they're going to submit it directly to the consulate where you're going to be applying for your E2 visa. There's also a process for applying for an E2 visa, where there is an electronic form that is filed called the DS-160. That's a form that gets filed, which is essentially your application for a non-immigrant visa. And in conjunction with filing the DS-160, your immigration lawyer will also be submitting your application packet to the appropriate consulate that you're going to be having your E2 visa interview at. And the various consulates and embassies have their own specific preferences for how they would like the E2 visa submitted in terms of the order of the documents, whether there's a page limit on the number of documents that can be included, whether they want the documentation to be submitted via email, or whether they want a paper submission that's mailed to them. The consulates have their own preferences. So that's another important thing to know. If we're dealing with a filing with USCIS, there's not going to be an interview. It's all going to be done through paperwork, and after the appropriate processing time completes, God willing, if everything goes well, then you should get an approval. And at that point, you would have E2 status to be able to direct and develop your E2 business. Now, with the consular filing to obtain your E2 visa, at the appropriate time, you are going to have an E2 visa interview. At the interview, you're going to show up with various documents pertaining to your E2 application regarding your business plan and all the various documents that are necessary. You're going to go to the consulate or the embassy, and you're going to have an interview where an immigration officer is going to ask you various questions. They may ask you what type of business you're investing in, what your role is with the business, how much money you've invested in the business, how you obtained the money that you've used to invest in your business, what you spent the money on, and various other questions pertaining to your E2 business and you as well, your experience, and so on and so forth. Upon successful completion of the E2 visa interview, you should get an E2 visa stamped in your passport. And with that visa, you should be able to seek entry to the United States to begin directing and developing your E2 visa. So that is the full cycle from speaking to your immigration lawyer towards being in the United States with your E2 visa. So let's talk about example number 2, which is purchasing an existing business. When it comes to purchasing an existing business, there's 2 main ways to go about this. You can either do a stock purchase where you're actually acquiring the shares of the corporation or LLC that's already in existence, or you can do an asset purchase where you're establishing your own entity, just like the earlier example that we talked about, whether it's an LLC or a corporation, and you're buying the assets of that business, the equipment, the goodwill, and the various assets that come with that business that you're acquiring. So those are the 2 main ways to go about acquiring an existing business. And there's very important considerations to take into account when deciding whether you want to do an asset purchase or a stock purchase. But I wanted to just highlight that there are those 2 different avenues. Now, if you're doing an asset purchase, then much of the steps that we've talked about earlier apply. You're going to set up a company, whether it's an LLC or a corporation. You're going to get the DIN number from the IRS. You're going to open the bank account for the business. You're going to transfer your investment funds from your personal account to the business's operating account. In the earlier example, you went out and you did all the individual expenditures for all the things that the business needed. In this case, the business is already in existence. So if you're doing an asset purchase, you're likely going to enter into a purchase and sale agreement with the seller of the business, where you are going to make a large transfer of funds from your business account to the seller in exchange for the assets of the business. And then once that transaction is completed, your attorney will finalize your application and submit it, similar to how we explained in the example before. And something that's far more common in purchasing existing businesses than it is for startup businesses is the use of escrow. Escrow is a way that E2 investors can help protect their investment when they're purchasing an existing business. So you can imagine, if you're considering an E2 visa, as you've seen from what I've covered so far in this video, and as you've heard, you have to essentially put the funds at risk before you apply for the visa. You can't just have the funds sitting in your operating account and say that you've made an investment, because at that point, the funds are just sitting in your business's account. You can very simply take those funds and transfer them back into your personal account the very next day. So having the investment funds just sitting in your operating account does not satisfy the requirement that the funds are at risk. So you can imagine you're an E2 investor. You have to put the funds at risk before you apply for the E2 visa, and you have no guarantee that your E2 visa is going to be approved. So here you are putting yourself in this dangerous position where you're putting all these funds at risk. You're investing all these funds with no guarantee that you're going to ultimately get the visa that allows you to operate your business. So in the context of purchasing an existing business, one mechanism that can help protect you is the use of escrow. And the way escrow works is that basically you identify what business it is that you want to purchase and you negotiate with the seller and you say, look, I'm applying for this E2 visa. It's not guaranteed that I'm going to get this visa. So I don't want to absolutely complete this transaction so that it's a certainty that I'm buying this business from you. I want the funds to be held in an escrow account, which is an account that's essentially held by a third party. And the funds are to be held in that account pending E2 visa approval. At the point of E2 visa approval, the funds are then set to transfer to the seller. So basically, through the use of escrow, you can help to shield yourself in the instance of a situation where you're putting all these funds at risk without a guarantee of getting the visa approved, such that in the event that, God forbid, the E2 doesn't get approved, the funds would return to you, depending on how you structure the terms of the escrow agreement. Now, an important note about the use of escrow: the escrow can have all these conditions about doing due diligence on the business. Really, the sole condition for the funds to transfer to the seller in the context of an escrow arrangement for E2 purposes is the issuance of the E2 visa. So we just covered the example of doing an asset purchase. I want to go back and just quickly touch upon a stock purchase. If you're going to be purchasing the stock of an existing entity, then you're likely not going to be establishing a new entity. You're just going to be purchasing the shares that are already in existence of an existing business entity. Now, for purposes of E2 visas, you're generally going to need to acquire at least 50% of the shares of the existing business for multiple reasons. For one, it's that the US entity needs to at least be 50% owned by nationals of a treaty country. That's one. And two, as I've mentioned earlier in this video, to qualify for an E2 visa, you need to be able to demonstrate that you're going to be directing and developing the business, and generally having that controlling interest of a business, including having the negative control of being able to block certain decisions by having at least 50% ownership, can qualify. And generally that ownership is helpful to demonstrate the ability to direct and develop the business. You're going to be acquiring the shares of the existing business. In this instance, you could similarly potentially structure the agreement with an escrow provision to have the funds held in escrow pending approval of the E2 visa. And again, you'll be providing all these documents to your immigration attorney, who will then compile your case and file your case with the appropriate government agency. Thank you so much for watching. I know we had a long video this time, but I know there was a ton of information. I hope you found it valuable. If you did, be sure to smash that thumbs up button when you like the video. It really helps YouTube know to share this information with a wider audience. So if you know anybody that can benefit from this information, please feel free to share this video with them. We're all about empowering you with knowledge. The more people that can watch this video that can benefit from this information, the better. As always, thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you on the next video.